The city of Victoria seemed like the perfect setting for a fresh start. Or at least that's what Megan and Lucas thought when they bought the big Victorian house with wide windows and gardens that stretched to the horizon. The house had a welcoming grandeur, promising a dream home for a couple who, in the beginning, saw it as a symbol of the life they were building together. Lucas was a promising lawyer, confident and always ambitious. Megan, on the other hand, was a young woman with a calm spirit, a dreamer passionate about art. Despite their differences, they believed that love would be enough to fill in the gaps. The first years of marriage were peaceful. Lucas dedicated himself to his work, and Megan spent her free time decorating the house, always imagining the day they would start a family there. However, over time, Lucas's methodical life became an anchor, binding Megan to a routine that didn't feel like her own. She tried talking to him, suggesting new ways to connect, and had asked many times for him to take more frequent breaks from work. Yet, Lucas always had an excuse: a new client, an important case, an unexpected meeting. He saw the house only as an investment, a possession that symbolized his status, not as a home that required his presence and dedication. As time went on, a gulf began to grow between them. Conversations turned into arguments, and differences that once seemed like minor details became a burden. Lucas dismissed Megan's work with art, hinting that she should find something that actually paid. He couldn't understand the value she found in simplicity, in the delicacy of the small creations she made in the makeshift studio in one of the house's rooms. To him, a career was a reflection of success. To her, work was an expression of what she held inside. One day, after a bitter argument about money and priorities, Megan sat in the garden, silently watching the house. She thought of all the details she had carefully planned, the curtains she'd hung with such care, the corner where she wanted to plant a small garden, and even the art studio she had always dreamed of transforming into a creative space. But, looking at the house again, she realized that all the care she poured into it was meaningless to Lucas. He saw the house as a point of reference for the neighbors, a silent display of his social and professional ascent. Megan's frustration grew as he disregarded her dreams, and the silence between them deepened. Eventually, the arguments became increasingly intense. Lucas, exhausted, began isolating himself in his office, where he spent endless hours. Megan, meanwhile, started spending more time taking painting classes in the local community, where she met people who truly understood and inspired her. Even so, she kept coming back home, hoping that Lucas would change, that just once he would see the woman she truly was. But for Lucas, work, success, and ambition were absolute priorities. He saw his life as a race for achievements, while what Megan saw as coldness, he considered focus. Then, on a cold winter night, Lucas finally decided that the marriage was no longer working. He came home late with the same exhausted look as always, but that night, he seemed different. Without preamble, he announced his decision. "Megan, we're living separate lives," he began, as she stared at him, speechless. "I need to move on, to focus on my work, on what truly matters." Megan felt her world collapse. What he was saying was the final word in a story that, to her, still held the possibility of a new beginning. She knew their marriage was far from ideal, but she had never imagined Lucas would make such an extreme decision without even trying for a real solution. "Lucas, don't you think we should at least try? We've built a life here." "I built a life with you," Megan said, her voice breaking. He shook his head, unyielding. "To me, it doesn't make sense to keep pretending. I want to sell my share of the house and move on. I've thought it all through." His words were a blow to Megan, and the pain rose like an unstoppable wave. She knew Lucas was someone who always put success above everything else, but she never imagined he would so easily walk away from it all. This was the same man who, years before, had promised her a life together, but now spoke of his share of the house as if it were a disposable asset. The separation was swift and cold, with Lucas handling every detail of the sale as if it were just another case in his office. Megan watched as half the house went to an anonymous investor, a stranger who only wanted the property as another asset in their collection. And so Lucas left Victoria, taking with him the last remnants of an empty promise. For Megan, the months that followed were all about rebuilding. She stayed in the house, determined to give new meaning to that space, which now, more than ever, was hers alone. Each room seemed to carry a painful memory, but gradually she rediscovered the value of her own presence there. The house that once symbolized sadness and abandonment began to represent the strength of someone who had learned to find beauty in pain. The days after Lucas left were filled with silence and uncertainty for Megan. Every corner of the house seemed to hold a memory, and even the walls, once a shelter, felt cold, as if the weight of the past lingered in them. Sometimes, Megan thought about letting it all go, leaving the house behind and starting over somewhere else. But something in her couldn't allow it. She decided to transform the home, once shared with Lucas, into a space just for herself, a place to reconnect with who she was. At first, the task seemed impossible. The weight of the past clung to every object and every detail of the house. But Megan slowly allowed her instincts to guide her. She started by removing everything that reminded her of Lucas: the shelves full of law books, the leather chairs he liked so much, even the heavy wooden desk that occupied his office. She turned the guest room into the studio she had always dreamed of. There, far from Lucas's critical gaze, she finally had a space to dedicate herself to painting without interruption. Art, once just a hobby, became her refuge. Megan began spending hours in the studio, exploring colors, textures, and new techniques with the dedication of someone who had finally found their purpose. Soon, her paintings began to reflect the serenity she sought. Snow-capped mountains, deep forests, and crystal-clear rivers. She drew inspiration from the landscapes around Victoria, trying to capture on canvas the peace those views brought to her heart. Megan started to gain recognition in the painting classes she attended. Gradually, others in the community began to value her talent and encouraged her to showcase her work. In a blend of surprise and gratitude, she realized that it was indeed possible to rebuild her life and make it something beautiful. Over time, the friendships she formed through art also helped her heal. The exchanges with other artists and the stories she heard showed her that, although she had gone through a painful separation, her experience wasn't unique, and life always had ways of surprising her. Meanwhile, Megan transformed every corner of the house with details that expressed her personality. In the living room, she hung a large painting she had created at sunset, with shades of blue and gold that seemed to illuminate the room. In the garden, she began planting her own flowers, filling the once empty outdoor space with the vibrant colors of her blooms. The house, which had previously felt like a relic of the past, was now a testament to her rebirth. One day, after months of hard work, Megan decided to take a bold step. Taking advantage of the annual spring fair in town, she signed up as an exhibitor to showcase her paintings. It was an event she'd always wanted to participate in, but while married to Lucas, the idea had seemed unthinkable. He would never have understood her desire to exhibit her work. To him, art was just a pointless hobby. But now, Megan felt that her art not only had value, but was also a way of showing the world the woman she had become. The week before the fair, Megan prepared her artwork with care. She chose pieces that best represented her journey and captured her emotions since the separation. There was one canvas in particular she held as her favorite, a painting of an empty beach at dawn, where the light reflected off the wet sand in an almost magical way. It was a reflection of her own path to self-discovery and inner peace. On the day of the fair, the town centre was decorated with colourful flags. The smell of fresh flowers mixed with the aroma of local dishes, and the main square filled with people eager to appreciate local artists and artisans. Megan was nervous, but also excited. She set up her booth thoughtfully, arranging each canvas to reflect her essence. As she watched visitors pass by, she felt a pride she hadn't experienced in a long time. The Spring Fair was one of the most prestigious events in Victoria, and being there exhibiting her own work was proof to her that her past no longer had to dictate her future. As the fair picked up, Megan became more and more absorbed by the enthusiasm and encouraging words of visitors. Many stopped to admire her paintings, offering sincere compliments. Some asked about the inspirations behind her works, and she, with a sparkle in her eye, explained each detail proudly. That booth, with its gentle colors and vibrant details, was more than an exhibition. It was proof of how much Megan had grown. Amid the bustle, a familiar shadow crossed Megan's booth. She looked up, and for a moment, her heart almost stopped. It was Lucas. Beside him was a tall, elegantly dressed blonde woman. He wore the same air of superiority she knew all too well, which only intensified her discomfort. Megan, however, held her ground. After everything she had been through, she was determined not to let Lucas's presence shake her confidence. He approached slowly, casting critical glances at her displayed works, as if each painting were proof of something inferior worthless. Megan tried to ignore him and continued assisting other visitors, but Lucas made a point of moving even closer, stopping next to her with his sharp gaze on the paintings. "Megan, it's really surprising to see you here displaying these works," he commented, with a slightly ironic tone that only she could detect. Megan stayed calm. She had been preparing for this moment, perhaps unconsciously, through all the months she had spent rebuilding her self-confidence. "Yes, Lucas," she replied, looking him directly in the eyes. "I've been working hard, and honestly, it's been wonderful to see people appreciate my work." Lucas raised an eyebrow, scoffing. "Well, it's good you have something to fill your time. After all, everyone finds their own path." He seemed to be waiting for a reaction, some sign of resentment or weakness that he could exploit. But Megan simply smiled, maintaining her serene gaze. The woman beside Lucas, who Megan now knew was named Clara, observed everything in silence. When Lucas moved away slightly to talk to someone else, Clara, who had seemed indifferent until then, turned to Megan and smiled warmly. "These paintings are really beautiful, Megan," Clara said, genuinely interested. "You have an impressive talent. Pieces like these inspire everyone." Megan was taken aback by Clara's sincere tone, which was far different than she had expected. She smiled gratefully, sensing that with Clara she could have an honest conversation. "Thank you, Clara. I put a lot of myself into these pieces. Painting has been a sort of refuge for me." Clara nodded, studying one of the paintings carefully. "I can see that. It's like each one has its own story, something special and intense." She cast a quick glance at Lucas, who continued talking to others, oblivious to what was happening. "You know, sometimes I think that's what people's lives lack. Intensity, something that really means something." Clara's words echoed within Megan, and for the first time, she realized that the woman in front of her might be more than just Lucas's showpiece girlfriend. There seemed to be a genuine longing for connection in Clara, something Megan herself had experienced on her journey of self-discovery. They talked for a few minutes, exchanging thoughts about the town, the fair, and eventually Megan's own artwork. Clara seemed sincerely impressed, observing each canvas with attention and, from time to time, giving Megan an admiring look that was hard to hide. Just then, Lucas returned, interrupting the conversation. "Clara, shall we? We still have other booths to see," he said impatiently, as though eager to end his encounter with Megan. Clara, however, hesitated for a moment, which seemed to irritate Lucas. "Yes, of course," she replied, giving Megan a gentle smile before being led away by Lucas. As she watched them leave, Megan felt a mix of relief and curiosity. Clara seemed, in a way, empathetic, and perhaps even caught up in a situation she didn't fully understand herself. When the two disappeared into the crowd, Megan took a deep breath and refocused on her booth. As tense as the reunion had been, it confirmed that her choices had been the right ones. Lucas was still the same, proud, controlling, and unable to see beauty beyond appearances. He hadn't changed a bit, while she had completely transformed. As the event went on, Megan found herself regaining her joy and confidence. She spent the rest of the day engaging with people who appreciated her art and valued her efforts. Every compliment was like a breath of fresh energy that strengthened her. By the end of the afternoon, Megan had sold several pieces and received invitations to participate in other exhibits and events. Her heart was at peace, filled with a sense of accomplishment she hadn't felt in a long time. That night, as she returned home, she walked through each room like someone who finally understood the value of every step taken. She closed the windows, let the scent of flowers from the now thriving garden fill the room, and looked around with pride. The house, which once represented a past filled with pain, now seemed to radiate the strength of someone who had found her own path, not merely as a survivor, but as a woman who had finally discovered herself. Lucas hadn't come to Victoria to support Megan. In fact, he could barely stand the idea of her thriving, especially in an area he'd always deemed insignificant. When he learned that Megan had gained recognition at the spring fair and was invited to showcase at a local gallery, his pride took a hit. To him, Megan was someone who lacked ambition, who lived on dreams. Deep down, the sight of his ex-wife achieving something on her own stirred a mix of envy and disdain. Lucas's decision to attend Megan's exhibition opening had one goal: to humiliate her. He wanted to showcase her as a mediocre artist, to prove to her and to everyone else that his own life in Toronto was far more successful and admirable. The idea that Megan could accomplish anything, especially alone, bothered him profoundly. When he arrived at the gallery, Lucas wore his best look of superiority. with Clara by his side as if she were an extension of his own status. He wanted everyone to know that he, Lucas, the successful lawyer from Toronto, was there and that his presence alone was enough to be noticed. With a cold smile, he watched Megan talking to visitors, and with each compliment she received, he felt his own ego being threatened. As he walked among the paintings, Lucas began to make subtle, disdainful comments aimed at undermining Megan's work. He made a point of approaching people and saying, in a supposedly innocent tone, things like, "Well, for someone who only started painting recently, it's not bad, is it?" Or, "She still needs to improve her technique, but maybe one day she'll get there." His words were meticulously chosen to plant doubt in the minds of visitors who didn't know her. At one point, while Megan was explaining the inspiration behind a painting, Lucas interrupted, stepping closer with a sarcastic look. "Interesting," he said loudly, drawing attention from those around. "You never mentioned this passion for art when we were together. Must be a passing phase, I suppose." The insinuation made Megan feel a wave of heat rise to her face, but she kept her composure. She knew he was there to unsettle her, and she wouldn't give him the pleasure of seeing her react. "Lucas, passion for what we do doesn't always need approval. I think all it really takes is the courage to keep moving forward," she replied with a serene smile. That response rattled him. Lucas tried to keep his composure, but it was clear that Megan's calmness was irritating him. And Clara, noticing the conversation, loudly complimented Megan, emphasizing the admiration she felt for her work, which only added to Lucas's discomfort. He shot Clara an impatient look, as if trying to signal her to stop admiring his ex-wife's work, but Clara was genuinely captivated. Realizing he needed a different strategy, Lucas began scheming a more targeted attack. If his public presence wasn't enough to humiliate her, perhaps he could hit her where it really mattered: her career. He started using his connections to speak with influential local art critics, insinuating that Megan's work was unbalanced and lacking depth, doing everything he could to brand her work as mediocre. After all, Lucas knew that Victoria was a small town, and if he could discredit Megan there, he might prevent her from gaining traction in larger circles. He arranged meetings with local gallery owners, presenting himself as a prominent lawyer from Toronto who cared about the future of local art. He used pompous arguments to persuade people that supporting new talent requires responsibility, and that Megan might not yet be ready for the level of exposure she was receiving. In his calculated tone, he tried convincing some to cancel her upcoming shows. Although most didn't take him seriously, his insinuations started creating doubts in certain circles, and the impact of his underhanded efforts began to spread. Meanwhile, Megan sensed something was off, but stayed resolute, until a few days after the exhibition, she received a call from the curator of a gallery, where she'd been invited to display her work at a significant event. "Megan, there's been a change of plans, and unfortunately we'll need to postpone your participation," the curator informed her, his tone polite but distant. The news hit Megan like a stone. It was an opportunity she'd been eagerly awaiting, and the reasons given by the curator were vague, as if he were hiding something. Other invitations she'd received for small shows in cafes and cultural centers began to be cancelled abruptly, and with each phone call, Megan felt that something was wrong. One afternoon, while speaking with a fellow artist who had supported her from the beginning, Megan finally uncovered the source of the obstacles. "Megan, did you know that Lucas has been talking to some galleries in town? It seems he's been spreading negative comments about your work. I've heard he's trying to block you from exhibiting, claiming your art is immature and that you're not ready to face criticism." The revelation was a shock to Megan, but it also brought a deep sense of disappointment. Lucas wasn't just dismissing her talent, he was actively trying to destroy what she was building. The woman who had supported his dreams for years was now the target of envy and vengeance from someone who couldn't stand to see her grow. However, Megan wouldn't let this bring her down. If he was trying to belittle and intimidate her, she would turn her frustration into strength. She decided to keep seeking support, sharing her work, and facing Lucas's attempts to block her. She met with friends, local artists, and supporters who valued her talent and discreetly told them what was happening. Soon, rumors of Lucas's actions began to spread. The artistic community in Victoria, known for its welcoming spirit, rallied around her, doing whatever they could to help her rise above the boycott. Lucas, unaware that his tactics had been uncovered, continued boasting about his efforts to correct the course of Megan's career. But to his surprise, he found himself increasingly isolated. People who once welcomed him warmly began to avoid him, and even Clara, who had once followed him blindly, began to see Lucas for who he really was. It didn't take long before he realized that in trying to bring Megan down, he had become the target of the community's disdain. Gradually, the control Lucas believed he held began to slip. Galleries that had once listened to his thinly veiled criticisms of Megan began ignoring his attempts to reach out, and he realized his actions were backfiring. Yet, wounded pride and jealousy toward his ex-wife prevented him from backing down. Lucas saw Megan's progress as a threat, a constant reminder that no matter how much he tried to dim her light, she shone brighter with every attempt he made to belittle her. Clara, increasingly aware of Lucas's behavior, started to confront him. "Lucas, why are you doing this? Why are you trying to undermine her work? I thought you came to Victoria to relax, but all I see is you obsessing over your ex-wife's success." Clara's voice was firm, her gaze questioning. In an attempt to keep up his facade, Lucas responded with disdain. "You don't understand, Clara. Megan is fooling herself. She never had the drive to do anything that actually mattered. I'm just keeping her from deluding herself further." But Clara looked at him now with an expression he disliked, a mix of disillusionment and disappointment. "Delusion, Lucas? The only person fooling themselves here is you. She's trying, and from what I can see, she's succeeding. Maybe you just can't stand the fact that she's stronger without you than she ever was by your side." Those words hit Lucas like a slap. In the days that followed, he began to feel a nagging loneliness. Clara, who used to accompany him to events, started pulling away, declining invitations to join him and no longer commenting on his work posts from Toronto. And contrary to what he expected, his presence in Victoria began to be met with suspicion and, eventually, avoidance. When he finally realized that Megan was now respected and that he was being shut out, anger and frustration overwhelmed him. Meanwhile, Megan continued to grow stronger, though the days were challenging. She knew Lucas was still trying to create obstacles for her, but each success was a quiet victory that kept her going. Soon after the unexpected cancellations, some friends in the arts community organized a special event in her honor, giving her an opportunity to showcase her work in a space that had become a refuge for local artists. The night of the event arrived, and the gallery was packed with visitors, all eager to see Megan's new work. It was a celebration of the support she had gained, of the respect she had built through her own efforts. In the middle of the exhibit, as she was talking to one of the curators about her upcoming series of paintings, Megan heard a stir at the gallery's entrance. Turning, she saw Lucas standing at the door. His face was tense, his eyes locked on her with a mixture of anger and frustration. He walked toward her with determined steps, set on confronting her one last time, now that he felt he had lost control. "Congratulations, Megan," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, while he cast a cold glance around at the people surrounding her. "I see you've managed to gather a loyal following." There was venom in his words, and Megan knew he was looking for a reaction. But rather than give him one, Megan just smiled, unfazed by his sarcasm. "Yes, Lucas, and believe me, I'm deeply grateful for everyone here." "I know it's the result of my own hard work," she replied, her tone firm but calm. In a mix of agitation and resentment, Lucas did something that shocked everyone. He began openly criticizing Megan's work, exposing a disdain he'd tried to disguise for so long. "You're all being deceived," he exclaimed, gesturing to the paintings on the walls. "Megan has no experience, no technique. She's not a real artist. This is all just a feeble attempt to appear talented." His words cut through the air, shocking the guests who looked on in astonishment and indignation. Megan felt a pang in her chest, but she remained calm. Before she could respond, Clara, who was also there, raised her voice in Megan's defense. "Lucas, enough!" Clara's voice echoed through the gallery, drawing everyone's attention to her. "We're here because we see talent, sensitivity, and authenticity in Megan's work. And you, Lucas, what did you come here to do? Prove that you can't handle her success?" Clara moved closer to Lucas, confronting him directly. "She doesn't need to prove anything to you." Silence filled the room. Deeply moved by Clara's support and that of everyone present, Megan looked up, gathering all the strength she had built over the years. "Lucas," she said with a calm that caught him off guard, "for a long time I believed the words you used to diminish me. But today, I know who I am, and what I do has value. I won't let your insecurities erase what I've achieved." Lucas realized that here, in this space where he'd tried to humiliate her, he was the one now isolated and ashamed. The people around him, who once looked at him with interest, now regarded him with reproach. He, who had always considered himself the most influential person in Megan's life, was discovering that his attempt to crush her confidence had ironically only exposed his own vulnerability. Stunned, Lucas took a step back, visibly shaken. Clara watched him in silence, and he realized he had lost her respect as well. Finally, without another word, he turned and left the gallery, leaving behind the traces of a quiet defeat. As he disappeared through the door, Megan was surrounded by friends and supporters who embraced her, sharing words of encouragement. The strength radiating from her was something everyone admired. That night marked not only the triumph of her exhibition, but a victory over the fears and insecurities she had conquered since Lucas had left her life. And so, when the last guests departed and the gallery lights dimmed, Megan went home, feeling at peace. The house, once a symbol of a painful past, now represented her resilience and the new life she had claimed with courage and determination. She had faced the shadows of her past, transforming them into light, and she knew that, from that moment on, nothing could impede her journey. The days that followed the gallery confrontation brought a mix of relief and renewal for Megan. The sense of freedom she felt was so powerful she could hardly believe it. After years of enduring Lucas's disdain and criticism, Megan finally sensed that the burden she carried no longer weighed on her life. She poured herself even more deeply into painting, creating works that expressed her journey of self-discovery, and the artistic community in Victoria embraced her more warmly than ever. Meanwhile, Lucas became more and more of a stranger in the city. The humiliating scene he had caused in the gallery spread quickly, tarnishing the reputation he had once valued so highly. People who once respected him now avoided his company, and Clara, disappointed and exhausted from seeing his true colors, decided to end their relationship. From that point on, Lucas wandered the city alone, as though he were on the fringes of a life he had chosen to destroy. For Megan, Clara's support had been an unexpected comfort. They stayed in touch and gradually built a sincere friendship based on empathy and mutual admiration. Clara, who had also faced her own disappointments, now wanted to dedicate herself to something meaningful, far from the superficial world she once inhabited. Inspired by Megan's courage, she decided to work with local social causes, engaging in art projects for children and teenagers in vulnerable situations. Megan and Clara came together around an idea they both found transformative: creating a collaborative art space in the community where artists of all ages and experiences could gather, share ideas, and showcase their work. It would be a place for art to be shared, a place to encourage talent, expression, and resilience, all that Megan herself had lived through in recent years. The following month, they held an informal opening for the space, and the community's response was incredible. People from all over the city attended. Young and seasoned artists brought their works and projects, and the event was a true success. During the event, Megan realized this was far more than a professional achievement. It was a personal journey now extending to touch other lives. One afternoon, while organizing a new exhibit with Clara, Megan received an unexpected call. It was a representative from a renowned gallery in Toronto who had heard of her work and wanted to invite her to a special exhibition featuring new talent. The news was as surprising as it was exciting. Megan was finally receiving the recognition she had longed for, and now, with a wealth of experience and a newfound self-confidence, she felt ready for this new chapter. Clara encouraged her, promising to keep the collaborative space running while Megan was in Toronto. And on the day of her departure, looking back at the house that had once represented painful memories and a solitary restart, Megan felt immense gratitude for all she had experienced. The house, now filled with life, flowers, and memories of resilience, symbolized the path she had walked and reminded her that the happiness and peace she had found no longer depended on places or other people. On the night of her first major exhibition in Toronto, Megan looked at her artwork, reflecting on the journey that had brought her there. The paintings spoke for themselves, a narrative of resilience, growth, and strength. Friends and admirers she had made in Victoria were there, including Clara, who had made it a point to support her. And for the first time, Megan felt that she had nothing left to prove. She was at peace with herself, and with her gaze fixed on a bright future, she knew this was only the first of many accomplishments to come. The exhibition was a resounding success. New opportunities opened up, and Megan returned to Victoria feeling that her life had truly transformed. She continued to dedicate herself to the community art project, dividing her time between exhibitions, teaching new generations of artists, and giving back to the city that had welcomed her so warmly. Lucas, meanwhile, no longer frequented Victoria. With his reputation in ruins and alone, he eventually returned to Toronto, where he tried to rebuild his life. However, he now understood that his obsession with success and control brought no real satisfaction. Megan was no longer part of his thoughts, but the memory of her served as a reminder of the consequences of his arrogance. For Megan, the past had become a distant memory that no longer defined her. She had overcome, turned pain into art, and was now living fully in the present. In the end, the house that had once been a stage for conflict had become a home of love and gratitude, a celebration of her journey and a reminder that even in the darkest times, rebirth is always possible. Did you enjoy this story? Leave a like and subscribe to the channel to follow more inspiring stories of resilience, renewal, and inspiration almost every day. Click on the links appearing on the screen to discover new amazing stories that are sure to touch your heart.